The soft hum of the suburban evening filtered through the cracked window in Erin Monroe's bedroom. The glow of a distant streetlight fell against the wall, casting faint patterns that flickered as the wind swayed the branches outside. The house, normally bustling with the chatter of his children and the rhythmic thud of feet against the floorboards, was silent tonight. Too silent. Aaron leaned back in his worn recliner, the creak of the fabric breaking the stillness. A magazine rested open on his lap, its glossy pages displaying vibrant photos of football highlights, but his eyes weren't on them. Instead, they were fixed on the clock hanging above the bedroom door. 10:45 p.m. Emily hadn't yet come to bed. His wife had mentioned earlier that she needed to go over plans with her brother, Keith, for the holidays. Aaron had nodded, half listening as he helped their youngest child brush her teeth. Emily's close bond with her brother was something he had always admired, family was sacred to her, and that devotion had been one of the reasons Aaron fell in love with her. But tonight, something felt off. The way Emily had kissed him on the cheek before retreating to the study had been mechanical, almost rehearsed. The warm, spontaneous affection that had once defined their relationship seemed to have dulled over the years. Aaron shook his head, blaming the creeping doubts on his own fatigue. Marriage wasn't a romantic movie. It was routine, compromise, and occasionally, distance. The sound of voices pulled him from his thoughts. It was faint at first, the low murmur of conversation coming from the study down the hall. Aaron glanced toward the door, his brow furrowing. Emily must have forgotten to shut the door while on the call. Normally, he would have ignored it, but tonight, the words seemed sharper, each syllable slicing through the quiet like shards of glass. His name was mentioned, though muffled. He got up from the chair, his feet barely making a sound as he padded toward the door. A part of him told him not to eavesdrop, it was probably nothing. But curiosity mixed with an odd sense of foreboding compelled him forward. As he stepped into the hallway, the voices became clearer. Emily's unmistakable tone floated out from the slightly ajar door of the study. He paused, his body hidden in the shadows. "I'm telling you, darling, it's just a matter of time," she said, her voice soft, intimate. "Aaron doesn't know that the kids are yours yet. He's, well, you know how he is. Trusting. Blind to the obvious." Aaron's stomach dropped. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Maybe it was a joke, an absurd misunderstanding. But before he could draw another conclusion, another voice responded. "Emily, we've waited long enough," came the low timbre of Keith's voice, steady and composed. "He's not going to just let you walk away with his kids. Do you even have a plan for how to tell him?" Aaron's chest constricted. He leaned closer to the doorframe, his hands trembling. The words slammed into him like a blow to the gut. His kids. Keith. The voice he had grown up trusting, the brother-in-law he had spent countless weekends grilling burgers with in the backyard, was now weaving a web of betrayal with his wife. "It's not something I can just blurt out," Emily whispered, her tone urgent but irritated. "You think I can just sit him down and say, 'Hey honey, by the way, these children you've loved and raised for years are actually my brothers'? It'll take time to ease into it. He's fragile, Keith. Fragile." The word stung. Aaron had never thought of himself as fragile. There was silence for a moment before Emily continued. "Look, I'll figure it out. We'll find a way to come live with you, but I need you to be patient. For the kids. The children. Their children." A montage of memories flooded Aaron's mind, teaching their son to ride a bike on the cul-de-sac, staying up late assembling a dollhouse for their daughter one Christmas, the quiet bedtime rituals where he read them their favorite stories. And now, in a single instant, the foundation of all those memories felt like it was crumbling beneath him. He backed away from the door, his breaths coming fast and shallow. His vision blurred, the hallway tilting and spinning as the reality of what he'd overheard began to sink in. He needed to confront her. No, he needed proof. This couldn't be real. Could it? Aaron stumbled back to their bedroom, the once familiar space now foreign and cold. He gripped the edge of the bed to steady himself. Anger boiled beneath the surface, sharp and raw, but it was accompanied by something worse, doubt. Had there been signs? Had he been so blind, so oblivious to the truth? His mind raced through a checklist of moments, small, insignificant at the time, but now colored with suspicion. Emily's phone always face down on the table. The late-night texts she brushed off as work messages. The tension in her smile that he had once attributed to the stress of parenting. The way Keith always seemed a little too involved in their family's life. And the children, did they look more like him, or was that his imagination now running wild? Aaron's fingers curled into fists. He wasn't going to let them manipulate him. Whatever this was, whatever betrayal had been hatched behind his back, he wouldn't let them take everything from him, not his children, not his home, not the life he had built. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and opened the contact list. His thumb hovered over the button to call Emily. But no. Confronting her now would tip his hand. He needed time to think, to plan, to protect himself. Instead, he opened his laptop, his fingers trembling as he searched for a way out. Moving companies, real estate agents, and a destination far away from everything he had ever known filled his browser history in the hours that followed. If Emily and Keith wanted a life together, they could have it, but not at his expense. When Aaron finally lay down that night, his mind was still racing. He glanced over at the empty side of the bed where Emily normally slept. She hadn't come to bed yet. He stared at the ceiling, the fan spinning above him in slow, methodical circles. One thought consumed him as the first hints of dawn broke over the horizon: he had to protect his children at all costs. Morning broke over the Monroe household with the reluctant, gray light of a cloud-covered dawn. Aaron sat at the kitchen table, his untouched coffee growing colder by the minute. His hands cradled the mug, not for warmth, but as if holding on to something solid might keep him from breaking apart entirely. The weight of what he'd overheard the night before sat heavy in his chest, each breath shallow and deliberate as he tried to piece together a plan. Emily walked in, her appearance polished as always. She carried the effortless glow of someone unburdened, her hair pinned neatly back, and her blouse perfectly pressed. The stark contrast between her composed demeanor and the chaos roaring in Aaron's mind made his stomach turn. "Morning," she said brightly, crossing the kitchen to pour herself a cup of coffee. "You're up early." Aaron grunted in response, lifting the mug to his lips as a shield. His eyes followed her every move, his heart thudding in his chest with a new awareness. "I was thinking we should get the kids to Grandma's a little earlier this weekend," Emily continued, her voice casual. "She loves extra time with them, and I know you've been wanting some quiet to catch up on work." Aaron's grip tightened around the mug. The ease with which she slipped lies into the conversation infuriated him now. He couldn't even meet her gaze. Instead, he nodded stiffly. "Sure." As she busied herself around the kitchen, Aaron studied her. The past few years had softened her, laugh lines framing her mouth, the faintest streak of gray in her hair, but now all he could see was her betrayal. He'd loved her, built a life with her, trusted her. And now she was planning to tear it all apart with his brother. The realization hit him like a gut punch all over again. He couldn't sit here pretending everything was fine, not with the storm brewing inside him. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tiled floor. "I've got a lot to do today," he said, his tone sharper than intended. Emily glanced up, her brows knitting together in confusion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he snapped, already heading for the door. Aaron spent the day driving aimlessly through town, a flurry of emotions battering him from all sides. His thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, sorrow, and desperation. He had no concrete plan, only the grim determination to act before Emily or Keith could. By the time he pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript diner on the outskirts of town, he felt a tiny flicker of clarity. He grabbed his phone and searched for moving companies. The idea had come to him in the sleepless hours of the early morning: he would take the children and disappear. Sell the house. Start over somewhere far from here. He couldn't confront Emily, at least not yet. She was too manipulative, and Keith was too calculated. If they caught wind of his suspicions, they would act first. He had to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than they ever anticipated. That evening, Aaron returned home, his resolve hardened. He entered quietly, the sound of laughter greeting him as he stepped inside. Emily was on the couch with their 2 children, curled up in a scene of domestic bliss so perfect it almost made Aaron doubt what he'd overheard. "Daddy," his youngest squealed, leaping off the couch and racing into his arms. Aaron knelt to catch her, the weight of her tiny body grounding him. He hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of shampoo and bubblegum, and for a brief moment, he felt the crushing weight of the situation all over again. These were his children. No matter what. No DNA test or whispered betrayal could take away the years he had spent loving them. "Hey, buddy," he said as his son approached more cautiously, offering him a shy smile. Aaron ruffled his hair, his voice softening. "How was your day?" "It was good. Mom let us make cookies." Aaron's eyes flicked to Emily, who was watching him closely now, a faint, unreadable smile playing on her lips. "That's great," he said, forcing a smile. "Why don't you two go pick out a movie? I'll join you in a bit." The kids scrambled off, leaving Aaron and Emily alone in the living room. The warmth of her earlier demeanor was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. "Are you sure everything's okay?" Emily asked, her tone cautious. Aaron felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. It was as though she was testing the waters, probing for weakness. "I told you, I'm fine," he said evenly, refusing to let her see the cracks beneath the surface. Over the next few days, Aaron began putting his plan into action. He was careful, methodical, ensuring he left no trail for Emily or Keith to follow. He contacted a real estate agent he trusted, explaining that he needed to sell the house quickly but discreetly. He framed it as a work relocation, emphasizing the need for privacy. Simultaneously, he began researching schools and neighborhoods in another state. Somewhere quieter, smaller. A place where they could rebuild their lives without the shadow of betrayal looming over them. He also took precautions Emily wouldn't notice immediately. He transferred money from their joint accounts into a separate one under his name. He gathered important documents, birth certificates, passports, medical records, and secured them in a fireproof safe in the trunk of his car. Through it all, he kept up the facade of normalcy. He smiled when the kids showed him their artwork, nodded politely during Emily's conversations, and even shared the occasional laugh over dinner. But inside, he was counting down the days. One evening, as Aaron tucked the children into bed, his son looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, are we going on a trip?" he asked. Aaron's heart clenched. He forced a smile, brushing his son's hair back gently. "Why do you ask, buddy?" "You've been packing a lot of stuff in the garage," the boy said. "It looks like when we went to Grandma's for Christmas." Aaron hesitated, caught off guard. His son was observant, more than he gave him credit for. "We might take a little trip soon," he said finally, his voice calm. "Would you like that?" His son's face lit up. "Yeah. Can we go to the beach?" Aaron chuckled softly. "We'll see." That night, as Aaron lay awake beside Emily, he thought about what lay ahead. There was no turning back now. The pieces were moving, and soon enough, the life they had built here would be nothing but a memory. But as much as he wanted to run, a part of him longed for confrontation. To demand answers. To force Emily to admit the truth, to look him in the eye and see the man she had betrayed. He would wait. The right moment would come. And when it did, he would make sure Emily and Keith felt every ounce of the pain they had caused him. The storm was coming, and Aaron was ready. Aaron sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The house sat quietly before him, bathed in the warm glow of its porch light, the same one he had installed last summer. The sight of it, a picture of peaceful, domestic bliss, mocked him. Inside those walls, secrets lived and thrived, ones that were now eating him alive. It had been days since he overheard that whispered conversation between Emily and Keith, and the storm inside him had only grown. By now, Aaron had prepared nearly everything. The house would go on the market in less than a week, the children's belongings were packed discreetly in bins hidden in the garage, and the accounts were sealed under his name alone. Each move brought him closer to the finish line, but one nagging thought clawed at his mind, the truth. He needed it, completely, definitively. Not just suspicion. Not just overheard words. Cold, irrefutable proof of Emily's betrayal. Aaron had spent years as an operations manager, a role requiring careful planning and relentless focus. He approached the destruction of his marriage with the same precision. In his free moments, when Emily believed he was working late, he dug. First, Keith. He started with his brother. Aaron always knew that Keith was charming in the way men with little responsibility often were. Keith, perpetually single, had long avoided real jobs and relied heavily on his magnetic personality to skate through life. Aaron had often covered for him, loaning him money, letting him crash on their couch when he hit a rough patch. That couch. The very thought of it now sent acid bubbling in his gut. Aaron combed through old photo albums and social media, looking at his children with new eyes. It wasn't obvious at first, he had been their father for so long that their faces were familiar down to the last freckle, but now the resemblance was undeniable. His son's square jaw mirrored Keith's. The curve of his daughter's eyes, once so beautiful to Aaron, now felt like a slap across the face. How had he missed it? How had everyone missed it? Second, Emily. Emily was harder to investigate. Her every move seemed carefully guarded, as though she had lived with the knowledge of her betrayal for so long that deception had become second nature. He knew he couldn't ask her directly, not yet. Instead, he installed a tracker on her phone when she'd left it unattended one night. Watching her movements play out on the screen filled him with a sick mix of dread and grim satisfaction. Most of her day was routine: yoga class in the mornings, errands during lunch, pick up for the kids. But twice, during what she had claimed were appointments for work, Aaron watched as the little blue dot stopped at the same location, an apartment building on the other side of town. Keith's apartment. The first time, Aaron told himself it was a coincidence. He stayed calm, meticulously saving screenshots of her location. The second time, he knew. It was Thursday evening when Aaron made the drive to Keith's building. He parked 2 blocks away, out of sight, and walked the rest of the way with his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. His breath came out in uneven clouds as he reached the side of the building. He looked up, counting the floors, until he saw the window, third one from the left, faintly glowing behind drawn curtains. Aaron's pulse quickened, and for the briefest moment, he wondered what he would do if he actually saw them. Would Keith open the door? Would Emily be there? What would he say? The fury that had been simmering inside him for days boiled dangerously close to the surface. Aaron didn't head for the front door, he wasn't ready to confront them, not like this. Instead, he rounded the back of the building, spotting an alleyway that led to the fire escape. The old steel ladder groaned under his weight as he climbed, his heart hammering with the effort. When he reached the 3rd floor, he crept toward the window and peered inside. For a moment, his mind refused to register what his eyes were seeing. The living room was clean and sparse, a bachelor space, but on the coffee table sat a framed photo of Emily holding the kids, grinning like it was a family Christmas card. Aaron stared at it, bile rising in his throat. His gaze shifted to the corner of the room where a pair of small shoes sat neatly next to a stack of toys, his daughter's toys. The realization sent a wave of nausea through him. Keith wasn't just a secret lover. He was positioning himself as a father, slowly sliding into Aaron's place one unnoticed moment at a time. Aaron clenched the metal of the fire escape railing so hard his hands ached. Emily, Keith's voice floated from somewhere deeper in the apartment, cutting through Aaron's silent fury. You want me to grab some dinner? The kids will be hungry when they get here tomorrow. Aaron recoiled as if struck. The kids. Emily had planned for his children to spend the weekend here. With Keith. With him. Aaron didn't remember climbing down the fire escape or driving home that night. His thoughts blurred together in a haze of red as he sat in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel. The house looked warm and inviting, a lie wrapped in perfect lighting and freshly painted walls. Emily's car was parked neatly beside his, the same car she had driven to Keith's apartment just hours earlier. When Aaron finally stepped inside, the sounds of cartoons and his children's laughter carried from the living room. He stopped in the hallway, watching as Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, assembling a puzzle with their daughter. Her smile was easy, genuine even, and it sent another pang through Aaron's chest. She looked like the perfect mother. Like the wife he had married. How long had she practiced that mask? She looked up when she saw him, her expression softening. Hey, you're home early. Dinner's almost ready. Great, Aaron managed, his voice even. I'll wash up. That night, long after the kids had gone to bed and Emily lay sleeping beside him, Aaron sat alone at the kitchen table. A whiskey glass sat untouched before him as he stared blankly at the wall, his mind racing with possibilities. He had everything he needed to act now: proof of Emily's betrayal, the knowledge of her plan with Keith, and a detailed escape mapped out for him and the kids. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The house was under his name alone. The funds were ready. The real estate agent had already set the gears in motion for a quiet, anonymous sale. But there was still a final piece missing: control. Aaron needed to time his move perfectly, to leave no opening for Emily or Keith to fight back. The children deserved better than this. He deserved better than this. Aaron pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a saved number. After a moment's hesitation, he hit call. The voice on the other end picked up quickly. "Hello. Hey, it's Aaron," he said quietly. "About that cabin you mentioned last year, the one upstate. Is it still available?" There was a pause. "Yeah, it's still empty. You thinking of taking a trip?" "Something like that," Aaron replied, glancing toward the darkened hallway where his family slept, unaware of the storm that was about to break. "I'll need it in a few days. I'll pay whatever it takes." As he hung up, Aaron leaned back in his chair, his heart thudding with quiet resolve. This was it. The pieces were in motion. He would take the kids, leave the past behind, and disappear before Emily and Keith had the chance to destroy him completely. But as the house creaked softly in the night, a thought whispered at the back of Aaron's mind, a dangerous one. How far would they go to stop him if they found out? The question lingered like smoke in the air, thick and impossible to ignore. Aaron didn't have the answer. Not yet. But he would soon. The hum of the highway was Aaron's only companion as he drove north, the packed boxes rattling faintly in the back of his SUV. The drive to the cabin took 3 hours, far enough that Emily and Keith wouldn't immediately track him down, but close enough to feel like he hadn't vanished entirely. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, every mile pulling him further from the only life he'd ever known. The plan was simple: leave the kids at the cabin temporarily, just until the house sold. He'd already spoken with the school district upstate, securing new enrollment under the guise of a family move. It was all falling into place. But the simplicity of the plan couldn't erase the complexity of his emotions. Aaron had been a loving husband. A proud father. A man who believed in the foundation of family, even when life's imperfections chipped away at it. Now, he was a man haunted by betrayal, his life divided into a clean before and a messy after. The cabin sat nestled among pine trees, isolated and quiet. It looked smaller than he remembered, its paint weathered and its porch leaning slightly to one side, but it would do. It had to. Aaron spent the next 2 hours unloading supplies he'd purchased in secret: canned food, blankets, a box of toys for the kids. As he worked, his phone vibrated in his pocket. Emily. The name on the screen sent a chill through him. It was a video call. Aaron's thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before he swiped to answer. Emily's face appeared, bright and cheerful. The sound of cartoons played faintly in the background, and he could see their daughter perched on the couch behind her. "Hey, babe," she said. "Just wanted to check in. Where are you? You've been out all day." Aaron forced a tight smile. "Just running errands. Thought I'd pick up some things for the house." Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him through the screen. Her eyes narrowed in that way they always did when she was trying to read him. "You seem off. Is something bothering you?" Aaron's grip tightened on the phone. "No, just tired. Long day." "Well, hurry home. The kids miss you," she said, her voice softening. Aaron nodded and ended the call, his heart pounding. Her words lingered in his mind: "The kids miss you." They were more than a statement, they were a weapon. A reminder of what he stood to lose if this plan failed. The next morning, Aaron sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The kids were still asleep, their bags packed and tucked away in the closet. Emily had left early for yoga class, giving Aaron a precious window of time. He glanced at the clock. He'd arranged a meeting with the real estate agent for later that day. The house was being listed as a private sale to avoid unwanted attention, but even with the precautions, Aaron felt the weight of risk pressing down on him. He didn't hear Emily come back until it was too late. "What's this?" Her voice cut through the room like a knife. Aaron looked up sharply, his chest tightening. Emily stood in the doorway, holding a piece of paper in her hand. It was a receipt, from the storage facility where Aaron had been quietly moving furniture and keepsakes for the past week. Aaron cursed himself for leaving it out, but he forced his expression to remain neutral. "It's nothing. Just clearing out some old things." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "What old things? Why didn't you tell me about this?" Aaron rose from his chair slowly, careful to keep his voice calm. "Because it's not a big deal. Just decluttering." Her eyes narrowed, her grip on the paper tightening. "Are you sure that's all it is? Because you've been acting really strange lately. Sneaking around, disappearing for hours." Aaron stepped closer, his jaw tightening. "You're one to talk about sneaking around." The words were out before he could stop them. Emily's face froze, her mouth parting slightly in shock. What are you talking about?" Aaron stared at her, the tension in the room growing thick and suffocating. This wasn't part of the plan. He'd intended to leave cleanly, quietly. But now, with her standing there, the weight of everything he knew burned inside him, desperate to escape. "I heard you," Aaron said, his voice low and steady. "The other night. Talking to Keith." Emily's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face before she masked it with feigned confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Keith and I." "Don't," Aaron snapped, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Don't insult me by pretending. I know everything, Emily. I know the kids are his. I know you've been planning to leave me. So spare me the lies." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then Emily stepped forward, her face hardening. "And what if I am?" she said, her voice cold and deliberate. "What are you going to do about it? Run to a lawyer? Tell the kids some twisted version of the truth?" Aaron's hands balled into fists at his sides. "I'm going to protect them. I'm going to make sure they're safe. And I'm going to make sure you and Keith never get the chance to rip this family apart." Emily laughed bitterly. "Protect them? From me? You've got it backward, Aaron. You're the one who's breaking this family apart. You and your obsession with control, your inability to let people be who they are. You think you're the hero in this story? You're not." Aaron felt the rage rise inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control now. "We'll see," he said quietly. "We'll see who the courts believe when this is all over." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" Aaron didn't answer. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emily standing there, her face a mixture of anger and unease. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, Aaron packed the final bag. The children were asleep, their innocence intact for now. Emily had locked herself in the study, the tension between them a live wire crackling in the dark. Aaron slipped into the children's room, watching them for a long moment. They were peaceful, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. "Soon," he whispered. "We're getting out of here." But as he stepped back into the hallway, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. He turned sharply, his pulse spiking. Emily stood in the doorway of their bedroom, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "You think you can just take them and leave?" she asked, her voice low and venomous. Aaron froze, his breath catching. She knew. Aaron's heart hammered in his chest as Emily stepped out of the shadows. The hallway was dim, the faint glow of the nightlight from the children's room casting long shadows on the walls. Her words hung in the air like a dagger suspended over his head. "You think you can just take them and leave?" she repeated, her voice quieter this time, almost a whisper, but laced with unmistakable venom. Aaron didn't respond right away. His mind raced, analyzing her stance, her tone, the flicker of fury and panic in her eyes. She hadn't known until now. She must have pieced it together when she found the receipt, or perhaps she'd noticed the subtle signs of his planning. Either way, the truth was out now, and there was no turning back. "I'm doing what I have to do," Aaron said finally, his voice steady but firm. Emily let out a bitter laugh, stepping closer. "You think you're the hero, don't you? The noble father, swooping in to save the day. You don't even see it, do you? You're no better than me, or Keith." Aaron's jaw tightened. "I didn't destroy this family. You did. You and Keith. Don't put this on me. Destroy the family. Emily shot back, her voice rising. You've been blind to everything for years, Aaron. Blind to the fact that you and I haven't been a real couple in ages. Blind to how your need for control has suffocated everyone in this house. Keith may have been a mistake, but at least he made me feel alive again. Aaron flinched as though she'd struck him. The rawness in her voice twisted something deep inside him, but he shoved the feeling aside. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about the kids, and he had no intention of letting them become pawns in this twisted game. You don't get to rewrite history, Aaron said coldly. You lied to me. You lied to the kids. You've been playing house while planning to run off with Keith. Do you think I don't see how that ends? You're not taking them away from me. Emily's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. You don't have a choice. Legally, I'm their mother. I have rights. They're not your rights to abuse, Aaron interrupted, his voice sharp. Do you think a court will side with you when they see what I've found? I know about the apartment, Emily. I know about the weekends you've been planning with Keith. I even know about the photo of you three on his coffee table, like you're already a family. Emily paled, her anger flickering into something that looked like fear. You've been spying on me. Protecting myself, Aaron corrected. And protecting them. From you. For a long moment, they stood there, the silence between them crackling with tension. Then Emily's expression shifted, her fear dissolving into something darker, calculated. You think you're untouchable, she said softly, almost conversationally. But you're not. Keith and I have been careful. You don't have any real evidence, and even if you do, you're forgetting one thing, the kids love me. You can't erase me from their lives, Aaron. No matter what you do. Aaron felt his chest tighten. She wasn't wrong. The kids adored Emily, even if they didn't see the cracks beneath her polished exterior. That was the part that hurt the most, that they would never understand the depth of her betrayal, the way it had unraveled their entire family. I don't need to erase you, Aaron said quietly. I just need to get them away from you long enough for them to see the truth for themselves. Emily's face twisted into a mask of fury, her voice dropping to a hiss. You're not taking them anywhere. The confrontation didn't end that night. The house simmered with tension over the next 2 days, every interaction laced with the unspoken war between them. Aaron kept his plans in motion, careful not to let Emily derail them. But Emily wasn't done fighting. On the third day, Aaron came home from picking up the kids from school to find Emily waiting in the living room. She was dressed immaculately, her posture rigid, and sitting beside her was Keith. Aaron froze in the doorway, his children still chattering excitedly at his side. His eyes locked on Keith's, and the air seemed to thicken with unspoken hostility. Kids, Emily said, her voice sweet and unnaturally calm. Why don't you go play upstairs for a bit? Mommy and Daddy need to talk. The children hesitated, sensing the tension in the room, but Aaron nodded and forced a smile. Go ahead, guys. I'll be up soon. As soon as they were gone, the mask slipped from Emily's face. She stood, her hands clenched into fists. You've been busy, she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage. Did you think I wouldn't notice the bank accounts? The real estate listing? You're trying to leave, Aaron. With my children. Keith stood as well, his expression less controlled. This isn't just about you, Aaron, he said, his tone low and menacing. You can't just take off and think we won't follow. Those kids have a right to know where they came from, to know the truth. Truth? Aaron snapped, his own anger finally boiling over. The truth is, you're a parasite, Keith. You've wormed your way into my family, lied to everyone, and you think you deserve a say in how this ends? Keith stepped closer, his jaw tightening. I deserve a hell of a lot more than you think. Before Aaron could respond, Emily stepped between them, her voice sharp and commanding. Stop it. Both of you. This isn't about your egos. It's about the kids. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Aaron's ragged breathing. Then he spoke, his voice cold and deliberate. You're right, Emily. It is about the kids. And that's why I'm leaving. I won't let them grow up in this mess. I won't let them become collateral damage in your selfish games. Emily's face hardened. You're not taking them. I'll fight you in court. I'll drag this out for years if I have to. Aaron stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a crushing tide. He knew she wasn't bluffing. He knew what a legal battle would mean for the kids, for their fragile sense of stability. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Aaron made a decision. You won't have to, he said quietly. Emily and Keith exchanged confused glances. I'll leave, Aaron continued. I'll go. But the kids stay here. The words felt like glass in his throat, sharp and painful. But as he said them, he saw the flicker of surprise on Emily's face, the way her confidence wavered for the first time. You're serious, she said, her voice softer now. Aaron nodded. This isn't about winning or losing, Emily. It's about them. And if staying here with you is what keeps them from being torn apart, then so be it. Emily blinked, stunned into silence. Even Keith seemed caught off guard, his bluster fading as he glanced at her uncertainly. Aaron turned to leave, his heart shattering with every step. He didn't look back as he walked out the door, his children's laughter echoing faintly in his ears. The battle was over, but the cost would haunt him forever. Aaron's departure was quiet, almost unnoticed. He left the house, the town, and the life he had built behind, carrying only the hope that his sacrifice would spare his children the pain he couldn't. And as the days turned into weeks, Aaron found himself in a small, rented apartment far from the life he'd once known. It was lonely, but it was free of lies, free of betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, it was a start.